It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I'm excited to talk with my guest today. Joining me is Dan Englander, founder of Sales Schema. They help business owners, salespeople, and account managers generate more business with existing customers. He's also the author of a couple books, The B2B Sales Blueprint, and more recently, Mastering Account Management, 102 Steps for Increasing Sales. Dan, welcome to Accelerate.
Hey, thank you for having me, Andy.
My pleasure. So take a minute, introduce yourself, maybe tell us how you got your start in sales.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I kind of stumbled into sales and landed this job as an account manager at an animation studio called Idea Rocket. So I was basically the first hire there.
Now, where was that?
This was here in New York City.
In New York City, okay.
New York City, big city. Yeah, so, the idea, the differentiator they were going for in a nutshell was basically to bring high-quality broadcast-style animation to explainer videos, which if you don't know, these are the videos that you'll see on a startup's page or a company's page that kind of describe what they do. So, I had a lot of head trash about sales. I like a lot of people, I thought it was something for like characters in Glengarry Glen Ross, and I kind of fashioned myself as a creative of some sort. So, eventually, once we hit a low point, and I was basically just an order taker doing proposals for people that would never get back to me, the owner was like, "Hey, are you interested in getting sales training?" And I was like, "Yeah, I probably should at this point." So, I got training. I ended up really hitting it hard, networking, meeting lots of people, reading lots of books, and then, kind of turned things around, learned all the best practices that you talk about on the show so much and from different people. But the problem was that I was wearing a lot of hats. So it started out with just 2 of us in the company, and then, it scaled up to eventually 10, but still I was just always doing too much. I had to also serve clients at the same time, manage projects and whatnot, which is something common, I think, of a lot of business owners that also have to sell. So, even when I did set up this process for kind of protecting my sales time and doing it every day as this continuous everyday effort, I still just never had enough time. So what I started doing was just being more vigilant about qualification and moreover, just kind of really focusing on account management. And that can vary a little bit between organizations in terms of what that definition is. But basically what I mean by that is trying to get more business out of the existing clients and trying to win the customers that are more likely to lend themselves to repeat business in the first place, and really putting full force into those as opposed to giving people equal time in terms of the sales process.
Okay. Which is, it's a choice that, a lot of salespeople are sort of confronted with how they allocate their time. Right. So, part of that, I think, obviously is driven by businesses, growth goals, right? Because you really can't completely grow and attain your growth goals purely through repeat business from existing customers.
No, not at all. But what I've observed is that often it's the most neglected element of the sales food pyramid, as it were. And I always wonder about that because I've worked with lots of salespeople and networked with lots of people, and what tends to happen is that people, I think, feel awkward about reapproaching old customers and asking them to buy, and it's sort of the irony, because I think early on most salespeople's fears are with cold calls and with new prospects, but quickly that sort of becomes easy to deal with. And what becomes more awkward is approaching somebody you've developed these collegial bonds with and trying to get them to repurchase in some way. I think that becomes a little bit more cryptic of a process.
Really? So why do you think that? Because I think that's sort of counterintuitive for most people, because they think, hey, it's just easier to even a prior customer that's no longer doing business with you, but there's an opportunity to go back and approach them. It seems like that would always be easier than somebody cold.
Right. I think it's awkward because you have developed that relationship at this point. You've already gone through the sort of trial by fire to get to persuade them to buy, and then it's sort of like they've now become customers, right? They're almost like your friend. It's sort of like if you had to go ask your friend to buy from you, it would feel more awkward than if you had to ask a stranger a lot of the time. But I think some other salespeople might not have that problem, and another problem that people deal with is just lacking a process for doing it, and they're left with nothing else to say to their old customers but, hey, what's new? Did you see the Jets game? Are you ready to buy again? And that is tough because it doesn't really, you're not in the same process that you had originally with the customer. Basically, you're in something else, and you're just suggesting things, but you don't really know what they're dealing with again. So you have to find a way to kind of reinitiate the original process.
Yeah, so I think really the point, and we'll get to that, I think, as we continue to go through the discussion today, is that you really can't, well, I've made two things. One is you can't ever really fall out of discovery mode with an existing customer.
Sure. That's a huge part of it.
So as an account manager, customer success manager, whatever label you want to put on yourself or is put on you, is that, you can never rest on the laurels of, hey, we've made this customer successful. There's always some other need, some other requirement, some other objective that they're trying to achieve. And as an account manager, you really have to constantly be, like I said, in that discovery mode, which brings up an interesting dynamic because you talk about, you see account reps maybe they get too friendly with customers. Yeah, where do you tell people to draw that line? Because I know where I would draw it, and I know where I tell people to draw it, which is, the customer is never your friend; they're your acquaintance. But it doesn't go past that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me personally, it's less about trying to find the line between friend and salesperson as it is about, or friend and prospect rather, as it is about making sure that account managers are trained in sales. And I think that's often something that is neglected. And I think if you are making sure that your account managers are keeping their sales muscles strong and they're incentivized, then the rest will follow. And that's a huge part of it, because I think a lot of the times account management becomes kind of siloed. So you have this salesperson that does what they're supposed to do, and they persuade and they win the business. And then all of a sudden it's just into sort of order taking and project management mode. So when account managers do come across opportunities, they don't really know how to pursue them, and they also don't know how to look for them in the first place. So I almost think of it sort of like how flight attendants and police officers sometimes, or whoever, are trained in first aid. It's sort of the same idea, except it's definitely going to come up more than a health emergency at a baseball game or something.
Trained in first aid, meaning they're not full EMTs, but they can band-aid it till somebody shows up.
Exactly. Yeah, and they've learned a lot and they've practiced it a lot, and they're definitely incentivized to use those skills when things arise.
So, I mean, it sort of raises a bigger question about the sales culture within company and how you, as you said, the customer success or account management's relatively siloed. But many companies are migrating to saying, hey, this is an integral part of our overall revenue plan. Mm-hmm. Thus, there's metrics, there's goals, the expectations that are laid on that are just as stringent as they would be for salespeople.
Right, exactly. And I think, though, that and it obviously is going to depend on the nature of the product. If you have a product that's more about retention and making sure that people don't drop off, maybe it's a SaaS product or something, then account management is going to be treated differently than if it's a sort of project-based model like I'm used to, and in my previous life. So I think that if it's the latter, then it's almost like you have to be involved. You have to focus on staying involved and being helpful, as opposed to making sure that the product that they're getting results from the product directly. So I think you have to kind of there is a differentiator between those two different models. And beyond that, I think kind of unifying sales and account management involves making sure that the account manager knows exactly how things played out on the sales call and exactly what people are expecting, and that the sort of process that's laid out is unified between the two parties.
You mean the handoff?
The handoff is a big part of it, but I think even beyond that, a lot of the times, especially with project-based products, the account managers work really hard to get everybody results, and then you have people implementing it, be it a website or a video, and then everybody kind of waves goodbye at the end because of all the hard work that was just done. Maybe there were high and low points in the engagement, but instead, you really have to kind of build in the prospect of repeat business from, I think, the first call, and there's different ways to do that, but to get specific, one way that I think is really valuable is for that SDR, for that account executive, to lay out a debrief call at the end, which is a chance, or some other session, you can give it a much sexier name, but basically a chance for the account manager and the other salespeople to come back into the picture and make sure that the customer is getting the best results from the product or service, basically.
So this is a debrief call at the end of implementation.
Exactly. Yeah. A follow-up. And instead of making that an afterthought where you're forced to kind of call people up and see if you can get them, and then what that does is it kind of implies to them that you're just looking for more business, as opposed to setting it up at the beginning, which lets them know, hey, this is part of what we do, and we don't separate it because we want to make sure you get results.
Yeah. So I guess that raised the question I was going to ask is, so in because we're talking about, again, more distinct sort of discrete project work as opposed to sort of an ongoing software SaaS type relationship with a customer.
Sure.
In account management in this environment is, there's certainly this need. Every company should be looking at ways to have an aspect of recurring revenue in there. You don't want to bring that prospect up, or bring the prospect of recurring revenue up at the beginning of the sales process?
I think you can, just as long as it is solving a challenge that your prospects have now or are likely to have by the end of the engagement. Okay.
I mean, I think that, I'm trying to think of various examples. If you have a website, right, certainly there's some sort of ongoing engagement.
Yeah, I mean, for website, the most natural thing, and this kind of brings me to the next point, which I think a lot of the times people kind of think of it as a zero-sum thing. Like either they purchase our flagship offering or it's all for naught. But I think it helps if you are focused on involvement as opposed to repurchase of your main offering. So to give some examples, that might be an upsell or ancillary offering. If you're selling websites, it could be SEO services. It also could be staying involved by building case studies and sort of getting them involved with your marketing people of some sort. Because that kind of becomes a two birds with one stone thing, because then they're also getting some coverage on your site and in your marketing materials, and you're kind of tied at the hip with their success at that point. Mm-hmm. And another thing is like just introductions to other service providers in your world, because then all of a sudden they enter your network of people that you work with, and when other needs arise, they're going to be more likely to kind of come back to you, and your partners are going to be able to sell for you. So I think kind of being open-minded about these opportunities and being creative is much better than just sort of focusing on this one thing.
Okay.
Repurchase.
Okay. So in your book, you divide your 102 steps for increasing sales, your account management book, into 9 different sections. So the first section is time, and I was just going to go through a few of the points I thought were kind of interesting or worth discussing. So one is under time, you say limit emails and limit phones. Now, what do you mean by that? Well,
basically, this was drawn from my experience and that of many people that are kind of like what I like to call, for lack of a better word, utility sales players. So the people that are tasked with serving clients and doing sales at the same time. So the problem is if you let a project, if you let something go, you can probably move heaven and earth to fix it. You can delegate things, you can get help, and so on. But you can't make a sale happen out of thin air. Usually, it's more unpredictable than that. So it has to be this continuous, everyday effort. So to limit email and limit phones, I basically lay out kind of specific ways to limit those distractions, so that when you do devote time to sales, you're not having clients hit you up. And when you are devoting time to clients, you're not having prospects hit you up. But basically just kind of systematizing these things so that you don't let one of them fall by the wayside.
Yeah, I thought there was a phrase in there I thought I would take issue with. You talked about deferring prospects to the end of the day probably wouldn't lose the business. And I say that because I come from the 180-degree perspective, which is responsiveness is the single most important habit you can develop as a sales rep.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the situation a lot. I guess my feeling is that with prospects that you've already spoken with, uh, and you do have the specific situation I'm talking about, where you have the heavy weight of projects on your shoulders. It's good to carve out some time to get back to the prospects, even if it is at the end of the day. I think if you're a full-time salesperson, you're in a completely different boat than this section right now. So I think that's the context.
Yeah, well, no, I've operated in that environment for a good chunk of my career before I started my own company, before running sales teams. So earlier in my career, that was the mode I operated. I was account manager and account exec.
Yeah.
And that's really how I came to the understanding of how important responsiveness was by...
Right. And I never disagree with the importance of responsiveness. Yeah. I guess what I was trying to get at there is to really batch up your tasks and to make sure that you're not having one thing pull you away from another. So that if, to get people to stop freaking out as much about what might be coming into the inbox. So that's kind of what I was going for there. Okay. But yes, I will not argue that responsiveness is something trivial. So.
Okay, now in your second section, serving your customers, you have an interesting one. You put out fires by offering options. So what did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, what I meant there is oftentimes when something goes wrong, people will just apologize profusely and not really offer any specifics about what can be done. So what I like to do there is just make the decision-making process as easy for your client as possible. So, and mechanically that often means just kind of laying things out in, an A, B, or C format with a recommendation. And that's definitely more on the client services side of things. But I think these things end up being tied together, obviously, because it's hard to get a repurchase if you can't put out these fires.
Yeah. And inevitably, there's fire in every relationship at some point or another. Nothing ever goes 100% smoothly. So I thought it was interesting. What you're saying is, you can make a recommendation for the customer what the best option is, but you're saying probably better to involve them in the decision making about what should be done by offering multiple options.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's good. But you don't want to create decision fatigue, but you do often want to give them things to choose from so that they can kind of take ownership over what happens as well.
Okay. So in your next section,
it's a fine line.
Yeah, but I think it's a good option to offer people. So in your next section, you had talked about you have your account management dashboard, and I liked your use of the term the likelihood legend. So why don't you tell people what that is and how you put that to use? Yeah,
and the likelihood legend is basically just a benchmarking system. So, there's all sorts of tools that you can use. There's all sorts of CRMs that'll lay out your pipeline in different ways. And I like to be agnostic.
Well, lay it out by stages with probabilities associated with it, right?
Yeah. And so what I was trying to get across was that, and it's basically a benchmark system so that you have a consistent way to rate where prospects are in your pipeline, so that you're not guessing at each and every stage. So it's going to vary depending on the nature of the offering, but basically you want consistency based on actions as opposed to just your gut or things that people have said or whatnot. So it becomes just a way to rate your leads. And what I was trying to do is give account managers and utility sales players and business owners a lot of the time just sort of an easy way to conceptualize how to rate their leads without going too far into the CRM rabbit hole, and getting overwhelmed with it.
Right. But I think the thing that you point out, which is interesting for people to think about, is that it's the one you lay out as an example is not based on some actions you take. So almost all forecasts I see, all the companies I deal with, it's 50% probability because we did a demo. Suddenly it becomes 50% probability, and it's 75% probability if we submit a proposal. And and to me, those are worthless benchmarks and stage demarkers demarcations where you have got examples like you've got agreement that the budget's acceptable. You've got they notify you you're in their short list.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There's things you have that are more precise based on information that you receive from the customer. And I think that's really the key thing for people that I liked about the way you express that is that when you build your forecast pipeline, your pipeline forecast, the stages have to be determined and defined by what the customer tells you, not by what you think is going on.
Right, exactly. And thank you for that. I think that a lot of the times people will kind of prioritize activity over actual, reality or results. So it becomes easy to be like, well, I've gone through this stage, and therefore the process is here. So yeah, it definitely does have to be on the customer side in terms of how they are thinking and what they've done. Or prospect side.
Yeah, and I talked about this in my most recent book, Amp Up Your Sales, is that, if you have 4 competitors, if there's 4 competitors on the deal, you're one of them, and you all have the same forecasting system, which is that submitting a proposal means you have a 75% probability of winning the deal. Well, all 4 of you can't have the 75% chance of winning the deal.
Right.
If you've all submitted a proposal. So, there's a huge fallacy and flaw built into those forecasting methodologies. So,
unless you know for a fact that who else is involved in the deal and you've really done some hard qualification and stuff. But even then it becomes a little bit, it involves guesswork, so.
Yeah. And as I said, not everybody can have the same probability.
Right.
So, doing that, I call that, when you base your probability based on the distance into the deal that you've traveled, I say you can't measure probability with a yardstick. That's basically what you're trying to do, which is, a much better way that you put forward, which is good. In your section on sales process, you talk about making your pitch focus on the why. This is, we've books written about focusing on your why, Simon Sinek and so on. But
sure.
But tell people what you mean about focusing on the why.
I think it just creates an emotional connection more than other things. And, I don't think I claim to be the one to be the first one to say focus on the why, but it definitely was helpful for me to start doing that. And actually what it does is it creates understanding about what makes you different without making people feel like they're being sold. I think that's the key to it. You can say, our differentiators for us at Idea Rocket, where we focus on high quality animation, we do all this, that, and the third, and you can't actually say that specifically, or I did rather. But I think when I started saying, I got started at Idea Rocket we started Idea Rocket because we realized that if you have a complex message, people need to understand it quickly, and it needs to speak well of your brand. So that's why we take this particular approach to animation. So I think when I just started phrasing it in that way, I could just sense a much more of an emotional reaction to what I was saying. So that's sort of where I was coming from with that section.
Yeah, man, it does help to, in one form, whether it's through a story or a metaphor or something, explain the why behind your product and your service and your offering.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's different ways to get that across, but I think it's the fastest way to kind of create that sort of reaction is by phrasing things like that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, you have another interesting phrase I like that used in your tips and tools section. You said prevent sales atrophy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So again, tell people what you meant by that, and we'll talk about this some because that's an important lesson.
Yeah. I think it's just really, as with anything, I think it's really just easy to kind of get stuck going through the motions, and then kind of making assumptions about prospects is one of the most common things I observe. Is you've dealt with what is seemingly the same situation over and over again, that you start assuming things are a certain way. You start cutting corners. You might not explain things in the right way. You might not send this or that follow up that you would normally send. And you also just, I think it's kind of like a glass of water that keeps spilling out and you have to keep refilling it. It takes some stamina to ask these tough questions. And I think that can kind of start to drain out of people after a while, where they're like, I could ask really how they're going to be making the decision. Or I think I have kind of a good idea because I've dealt with other prospects like this in the IT space. So I'll just leave that be for now. And that's kind of what I mean by being conscious that is a thing that it will probably happen, and B, kind of staying on top of your game, if making sure that you're getting on enough calls and that you're not sort of, allowing yourself to stagnate and just kind of being aware of it. Yeah.
Well, I think people listening, probably again heard me say this, but every prospect, without sounding too trite, every prospect is like a snowflake. They're all, each one is individual. The way they process information, gather information is unique. You may seem like you're getting the same questions, but that's not the same person asking it.
Right, exactly.
So you really need to be, sort of gets into, when I've had a guest on the show, we've talked about mindfulness within selling. You really need to be You need to be present. You need to eliminate distractions, listen without your bias filters up, listen without judgment.
Right. And I think it's worth pointing out that when you say the same thing over and over again, you become your own biggest critic. You become like your own heckler in your head. But you have to remember that your prospect has never heard this before. Each and every prospect has never heard this before. So you have to just kind of keep up the energy, keep going through it.
Well, to me, it's almost the opposite, right? Is that chances are the customers have heard pretty much the same thing from your competitors. So you really need to be mindful, to me, every time I have an opportunity to present to a prospect, it's like, yeah, they've heard this. So what am I going to say that's different?
Right. That's important too. Or, if it depends on the situation. I think if you aren't dealing with the competitive situation as much, then it is about making them feel the pain of not working with you, or of not getting the solution as much too. But yeah, I think you're right. I think finding a way, and that's why I like going back to the why. Is I think it sort of verbally separates you from the sort of noise that they're going through on the other half dozen people that they've researched in Google.
Yeah, and last point on this one, there's always competition, right? Because they can always make the decision to do nothing, and so that is. To me,
that's the biggest competitor.
That is the biggest competitor. That's the one that you have to really be selling against more than your competitors.
Right, exactly.
All right. You had an interesting point in your section on farming about providing a take-home guide. So I think I know what you meant by that from having read through it, because I had something similar, at least I think it was similar, that I did. But why don't you tell people what you meant when you've got a customer, you close the deal. What is the take-home guide?
Yeah, it's basically some sort of useful tool or material that is going to help your customers get the best results from your product or service, even if they never choose to work with you again. So I think that it's sort of differentiated from just general content marketing because it's a little bit more special. It's a little bit more tailored to the person that actually now has your product or has undergone your services. So it's something that can be keeping you in front of your prospects and your customers rather, in a way that a Christmas card really can't. So that's sort of the idea of it. And since I've wrote this book, I think that there's a lot of more tools that have kind of become mainstays. And there's different ways to deliver a take-home guide. It doesn't necessarily have to just be like a PDF. It could be an autoresponder series over email, or it could be a video series or something else like that. But the idea is that it's something that is actually valuable that you can present to your existing customers. Yeah,
I like that. I mean, one thing I would add to it is at the beginning, and again, I talk about this in one of my books, is I think, especially in sort of project work, really important, and especially in competitive situations, is that when the customer's given you the order, the first thing you want to do as a sales rep is pick up the phone, and you can do this with the account manager, pick up a phone or in person, meet with them, and do a decision review. Say, look, this is why you contacted us in the first place, or we contacted you. This is what your requirements were. This is why we bid what we bid. This is why you accepted our bid. This is what we're delivering and when.
Right. I think that's good.
If you put that into that take-home guide as sort of the first chapter, I think that starts becoming really powerful, because then they can always reference back, because in any sort of competitive situation, what happens when the customer makes the decision? Let's say they're talking to 4 vendors. In their mind, what they bought was sort of like the best of each of the 4 vendors.
Right. Yeah.
Because, they're not they're necessarily confused, but it's just the way the mind works, right?
Yeah.
This is what's attracted me, da-da-da-da-da. And I've seen it so many times. Then when you actually deliver the project, you deliver the work, you deliver the product, there's this little bit of disappointment. It's like, wait, didn't we order, doesn't this come with, think about your own experience buying, a car or some feature you thought was on it maybe that didn't show it. So have that call or put it in the take-home guide, do both, so that when the customer has a reference about their relationship with you, there's the history.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'll have to keep it in mind for the second edition, because that's really solid. The only thing that I would add to that is sometimes it's good if you can get a third party to do that interview, I think, because it's often easier to get more candid answers and to figure out where you stand when it's not the same person that took them through the process.
Well, as long as they have the knowledge.
Right, as long as they know what's going on.
Yeah, if they didn't have the background, the knowledge, then because doing a buyer experience survey is an important part of that as well. So, well, good. Okay, going into the last segment of my show, where I got some one hypothetical question and some real questions I asked my guests. So, Dan, this first question, a hypothetical scenario in which you, Dan, have just been hired as vice president of sales at a startup whose sales have stalled out, and CEO is anxious to get sales unstuck, back on track. Sales turnaround has to start somewhere. So what 2 things to do your first week on the job that could have the biggest impact?
That's a very good question. I think the first thing would be to learn, figure out what's going on, talk to salespeople, talk to a representative group of prospects. But I think that's kind of a given. That's just the best practice. And then chances are from that thinking, the heuristic that I would use would be a big dumb idea sort of thing. So if I was, twice as greedy and half as smart, what would I do to turn things around? Because it sounds like it's a short time frame sort of situation. And chances are that thing would be contacting the most valuable customers and doing something that would be helpful to them to restart the conversations with them, and finding out from the research that I had done some other ancillary offering we could sell to them. Because that tends to be the lowest hanging fruit.
Okay. All right. Good. So some rapid fire questions. You give me 1-word answers, or you can elaborate a little if you wish. So when you, Dan, are out selling your services, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
Sure, it's not an original one, but I think helpfulness. I think you have to go beyond just pitching and stuff, and you actually have to add a lot of value and context to the decision making process. And I know this is something that you deal with a lot on the show, so I know it's not the freshest answer, but I think that's the most important thing now is letting them know what sort of landscape they're making their buying decision in, and where you guys fit into it.
Hey, this is a safe space. There are no wrong answers here. So, who's your sales role model?
Good question. I'm a big Neil Rackham fan. I just really like spin selling. I think it was just kind of prophetic, and based on when it came out. And it was the first book. Maybe there's others, but it was the first one that I read that was just really driven in data, and then got across the idea that it's really about sort of understanding things, qualifying, building rapport, as opposed to the older books that I had read, which were just about kind of like pitching. And I think it almost like anticipated where we'd be now in terms of like informational parity between buyers and sellers.
Okay. One book other than your own that every salesperson should read.
Well, I guess I kind of led into spin selling, so that's a great one. Another one that I've really enjoyed recently is Nate Silver's The Signal and the Noise. I really like to read books that aren't directly related to sales to get sales takeaways sometimes, and vice versa. And I guess the main takeaway there is just sort of like being a fox and not a hedgehog. And if you haven't read the book, foxes are sort of drawing from all sorts of different areas. They're not ideologically inclined. They see everything through a different lens depending on the situation, and hedgehogs are kind of set in their ways, and they're either communists or libertarians or Republicans or whatever it may be. They see no matter how much data they get to the contrary of the way they think, they just zoom in on that one way of thinking. So I think you can almost apply that to sales too, and sort of borrow different strategies for different situations, as opposed to having just like one overarching approach for everything.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that. Okay, last question. What music's on your playlist these days?
My favorite question. I'm listening to a lot of early Funkadelic. I've been listening to Clutch, which is this metal band I like. What else? Some surf rock. I've been listening to like Link Ray and Dick Dale.
Oh, Dick Dale, classic, yeah.
Yeah. I play guitar, so I love style.
Love to do those surf riffs.
I try, yeah.
And so Funkadelic, even like Grand Funk Railroad and those guys?
Not so much of that, but it's more like Parliament Funkadelic.
Oh, Parliament. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Wow, very diverse. Good.
Thank you. I try.
Yeah, you got some old stuff in there for a young guy. Good stuff. All right. Well, Dan, thanks for being my guest today, and tell folks how they can find out more about you.
Yeah, they can find me at salesschema.com. And if they go to salesschema.com/accelerate, there'll be a special surprise treat that may or may not be one of my books.
Perfect. There you go. All right. Well, Dan, again, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it.
And remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And one easy way to do that is to make this podcast Accelerate a part of your daily routine, whether you listen on your commute, in the gym, or make it part of your morning sales meeting. That way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Dan Englander, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.